Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Welcome to Trump Watch. Let's begin with the World Cup soccer competition. The United States made it into the final 16 teams. They played Belgium yesterday, lost 4-1. But that's not really the heart of the story here. President Trump, prior to the game, made a telephone call to the president of the international governing body of this soccer league, a group called FIFA, and asked the president to review the referee's disqualification of one of the players on the American team based on some foul that he had committed in the previous game. So the president of this league conducts this review, and lo and behold, he overrules the referee's decision. I mean, this is absolutely incredible. What does the soccer league have to do with the U.S. government? It's like Trump can't help himself, that he's got to intervene in every area that he thinks is important, at least to him. And to make this phone call, it's absolutely incredible. Now, Trump says, well, I didn't ask him to overrule the referee's decision. I just asked him to review it. Well, come on. I mean, the guy's not dumb. He knows if he gets a call from the President of the United States asking him to review it, the reason is because he wants it overturned. Okay, it's not formally cheating, but it's just got a taint to it. It's got a smell to it when the president's getting involved and trying to get a ruling overturned. Even if the ruling's unjustifiable, that's something for the league to deal with, not for governments to deal with. And what actually ended up happening is, like, much of the world ended up rallying behind Belgium because they were so outraged over this intervention. But in any event, the U.S. lost the game. If they had won the game, I think everybody would have said that it was tainted. So there was another reason why not intervene. But in any event, much of the world was cheering the defeat of the U.S. team, not because they disliked the U.S. team, but because they disliked what Trump had done, which he shouldn't have done. Moving on to Iran, it seems that the Iranian regime is still firing at ships in the Strait of Hormuz that are not complying with its dictate of getting its permission and possibly paying its tolls and using its routes to go through the Strait of Hormuz, which of course is different from a totally open Strait of Hormuz. And so Trump is threatening to initiate his new bombing attack. And I'm sure he is reluctant to do that, though, because of the midterms coming up. But here he is. He's still stuck with his tar baby. He can't get out. This is what I've been saying for months now, that this has turned out to be a tar baby for the president. He can't just walk away and say, it's not my business anymore. I've attacked you. I've destroyed your entire military. I won. The tar has him there. And so how's it going to go? Who knows? I think it's impossible for anyone to predict how this thing's going to end up, except for the fact that the U.S. military is tied down there. Trump's tied down. Remember, as I pointed out in the previous video, that when you're holding somebody down, okay, he's not free, but neither are you. Because if you get up to be free, to free yourself, you have to free the person you're holding down too. So, I mean, the beneficiaries of this are the American people, because the U.S. government has less ability to focus its attention on them to continue destroying their freedom in whatever way it wants, the welfare state, the drug war, the war on immigrants, and so forth. I think the Cuban people are beneficiaries of this too, because clearly the national security state is reluctant to initiate its invasion that it's been dreaming of ever since its Bay of Pigs invasion turned out to be a fiasco. It's got to wait until this tar baby's over. So how's that going to turn out? Well, I think it depends on the tar baby. We'll just have to wait and see. But what I really want to analyze today is the situation in Venezuela. I find this absolutely fascinating. And so what I want to do is just break it down. I know I've talked about it before, but I want to break it down in very simple terms because I think it's one of the most phenomenal aspects of U.S. foreign policy in our lifetime. And yet it's being treated as totally normal by the mainstream press. Hardly anyone questions it. It questions the weirdness of it all. It's just amazing. And of course, all the MAGA supporters of the president, they don't question it. They act like it's normal. The right-wing press acts like it's normal. In fact, I finally came across a piece, and maybe there's others because I don't keep up with right-wing writers. I find them tedious and boring. But in the Wall Street Journal, the premier right-wing newspaper in America, their long-time conservative columnist, Mary Anastasia O'Grady, wrote the first and only piece that I'm aware of from a right-winger questioning this whole thing that Trump is doing in Venezuela. I mean, and I was shocked that a conservative had finally broken through and realized this is really strange. But I'm pleasantly shocked. What I'm shocked about is that all the other right-wingers, as far as I know, there may be others, and correct me if I'm wrong, there may be others, but either people are just scared to criticize Trump, or they just defer to authority, or they just accept automatically whatever narrative Trump and the national security state put out. So let's start out with the Hugo Chavez regime. Okay, well, no, let's start out with the Cuba regime. Let's start there. That when Castro takes power and installs a communist regime there, the U.S. government puts an embargo, economic embargo. Now that's separate and apart from the invasion at the Bay of Pigs, the partnership between the CIA and the mafia to assassinate Castro, the repeated attempts to murder Castro, despite the fact that Cuba had never attacked the United States or even threatened to do so. This economic embargo has always targeted the Cuban people with death or extreme impoverishment as a way to get them to rise up in a violent revolution and oust their communist regime and install another pro-U.S. right-wing dictatorship like the one that preceded Castro, the Fulgencio Batista regime, or comparable like to the Pinochet regime in Chile that the U.S. helped install in 1973. But the idea is always target the Cuban people in the name of helping them, of course, with death and starvation in order to get this regime change. Well, if we now move over to Venezuela, I don't know exactly when, maybe the 70s or 80s, was taken over by a socialist communist guy named Hugo Chavez, who was closely aligned with the Castro regime or the Cuban regime there in Cuba. He's a self-avowed Marxist. He loves socialism. He loves communism. And U.S. officials considered Venezuela at that point a grave threat to U.S. national security, just like they've always considered Cuba a grave threat to national security. The idea is that just because a regime is communist, that makes him a threat to U.S. national security. This is all part of the old Cold War racket, which is still going on because they still got the embargo against Cuba, now a full oil blockade, despite the fact that the Cold War ended back in 1989 or 1991. So Chavez was, like Castro, he was considered a grave threat to national security, especially since he was totally independent of the U.S. empire. He would mock U.S. presidents and U.S. officials and stuff, and they hated that. He mocked the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, the National Security State. They hated it. All right, so what the U.S. did was they did the same thing they did with Cuba. They imposed an embargo or sanctions, economic sanctions on Venezuela, on the Venezuelan people. And the idea was to try to inflict maximum economic harm, death by starvation and illness on the Venezuelan people in order, again, to give them the incentive to rise up in a violent revolution and oust this Hugo Chavez regime. And the idea was that once this happened, they could install another right-wing pro-U.S. dictator like Pinochet in Chile in 73. Now, the Venezuelan people, however, don't have guns. Okay, they have gun control in Venezuela. So rising up against this regime would be very difficult, impossible. Now, how are you going to rise up against a regime that's a national security state? Because they're a national security state, just like the U.S. is a national security state and has been since 1947. But they can't do it. They'll just start mowing you down as you start to protest or head on over to the National Palace and demand the ouster of the president. Well, Chavez ends up dying, and he's replaced by Nicolas Maduro, who, is a self-avowed Marxist, communist, believes in this total socialist system, and so the U.S. doesn't let up, and they have regime change operations. You'll recall that they declared some guy, I think his name Juan Guaido, a Venezuelan, the new president of Venezuela, which was ridiculous. And he thought he was going around with his chest pumped up, everything. I'm the new president. Because the U.S. had decreed him to be the president. Except that in reality, he wasn't the president at all. And then there was another regime change operation, and that didn't pan out. So they just kept strengthening these sanctions, trying to get the Venezuelan people to rise up without guns to oust the regime. In other words, they were put in a position, you starve to death or you oust your regime. Well, there was a third option, and that was escape the country and try to survive. Because you see, they were being squeezed, the Venezuelan people were being squeezed by the socialist system, which, of course, it creates economic chaos, crisis, impoverishment, starvation. With this economic embargo, as the other part of the vice, they were just being squeezed totally by the U.S. and their own government. And so what they decided to do is flee. Said, well, to survive. I mean, when you're faced with starvation or death by a national security state force in your government, what are you going to do? You're just going to die? You're just going to let your children die of starvation? I don't think so. You're going to escape. You're going to flee the country. But that, of course, assumes that other countries will take you. If no other countries will take you, then you're going to stay there and die, which is what the U.S. wanted to happen to this group of people, the private sector. So there was antipathy toward the regime, the socialist-communist regime, and there was, a threat against the populace: oust the regime or die of starvation. So they fled. And fortunately, some countries in South America were willing to take them. 8 million people. I mean, this is what a lot of Americans don't realize, is that huge exodus of Venezuelan refugees was caused by their own government. It just boggles the mind, because I see Americans going to church every Sunday and, wearing their religion on their sleeves, and, boy, we're Christians and all this. And then they're just nonchalant about their government targeting innocent people with death. It just boggles the mind. And that's what sanctions are. They're an instrument of death. Martin Luther King said that this is the most violent regime in the world, and it really is. But sanctions are just become a normal part of American life. It's like Americans go to church and say, oh, no, it's sanctions. We're going to pray for our neighbor. Love, love, love. But we're going to, on Monday morning, got to support those sanctions, you see, because they're just a normal part of America's foreign policy arsenal. So this goes on, and as we all know, many of those Venezuelan refugees came to the United States thinking, oh, they'll take us. I mean, they're in large part responsible for our plight here. And so they come over here, and no, they are treated like horse dung. They're called invaders. They've got tattoos on them. They're gang members. They want to do us harm, including the ones that are coming over carrying their babies in their arms. Got to deport them. They're bad people. They should never have escaped Venezuela. They should have sat there and died, either by starvation or rising up and trying to put up a U.S. right-wing dictator there. I mean, some of them, as everybody knows, were sent to El Salvador to be treated like terrorists, to be tortured, to be potentially detained, incarcerated for the rest of their lives for doing what? They hadn't done anything wrong. I mean, just phenomenal. And then others were forcibly deported to Venezuela, where they faced death by starvation or death by the national security forces of the Maduro regime. So this goes on, and finally the U.S. gets frustrated that it's not working. And it's just creating more conflict, more chaos, and whatever. So they finally go in there, and they use the drug war as a way to create this huge crisis in Venezuela. And I said this, as I've pointed out in previous issues of Trump Watch. I said that prior to the whole Venezuela thing erupting, there was the Epstein scandal, where Americans were rebelling against Trump on the Epstein files. And I said, be prepared for a foreign policy crisis, because it's coming. This is a time-honored way where they distract attention away from these rebellions, where people will rally around the flag. And so, sure enough, shortly after I said that, they start moving this huge military armada. And they start killing these boat people who they don't even know are distributing drugs or violating. They say, we suspect they are. We have information they are. Secret information we can't reveal to anybody. And they just start murdering these people. And that's what it was. You got soldiers blindly obeying orders to murder. Okay? Feeling, I'm sure, that Trump will pardon them if they're ever prosecuted, but who's going to prosecute them? Who's going to impeach Trump for state-sponsored murder? Drug offenses are not a death penalty offense. And our criminal justice system is based on bringing people to justice. All they had to do was approach those boats and say surrender, and every one of them would have surrendered. I mean, when you're in a little boat and you got a destroyer or an aircraft carrier there telling you to surrender, you're going to surrender. But at least give them a chance to surrender. And that's not what they did. They just fired at them and killed them. That's what America stands for now. That's what America represents. And they use the drug war to do this. And then they use the drug war to justify a military raid in Venezuela that kills 100 people, innocent people. These people weren't doing anything against the United States, in an effort to capture Maduro and his wife and bring them to stand trial in America for supposedly violating American drug laws while he's serving as president of the country. As if American drug laws apply everywhere. I've often wondered what would happen if some other nation came into the United States and kidnapped some high federal official and took them back to their country saying, well, we're accusing them of a drug war offense in our country. We're going to put them on trial. I have no doubts that U.S. officials would scream like banshees and say, no, you can't do that. Only we can do that. But in any event, elevated as an interim president is the vice president, a woman named Delcy Rodriguez. But the regime doesn't change. Trump did not use the opportunity to use the military for a regime change operation. Now, if we go back to the presidential election in Venezuela in 2024, Maduro was running against some guy, I forget his name. Guy's now living in exile in Spain. But he was a stand-in for the leader of the dissident movement, a woman named Maria Corina Machado. And because they disqualified her from running, they knew she was popular among the Venezuelan people. So this guy clearly wins the election. I mean, they've got the tallies showing that it was like a 2-to-1 march or something. I mean, there's been estimates that like 80-90% of the Venezuelan people voted against Maduro. But Maduro declares himself the winner. He stole the election. And when people started to protest, he just sends his national security state forces out into the streets and puts them down, jails protesters. They still got 400 protesters in jail because nothing's changed. It's still this socialist-communist regime. Now, it's more than that, though. The U.S. said that it was a narco-terrorist regime. So it's still the same regime. They've got the guy in charge of the national security state there that puts everybody down to protest, is a guy named Diosdado Cabello. He's ruthless. He's brutal. I mean, that guy will stop at nothing to punish anybody that needs to be punished for protesting against the Venezuelan regime. And he's an avowed Marxist, socialist, communist. He's under indictment by the U.S. for drug war offenses. Do you think the U.S. has demanded his extradition? Not as far as I know. All they got to do is tell Delcy Rodriguez, who has now become a puppet of the U.S. regime. She does whatever Trump tells her to do. Trump could just order her to put Cabello on a plane and bring him up here, stand trial with Maduro. Doesn't do it. He did it with a guy named Alex Saab down there in Venezuela. He told Delcy, at least I think he told her, you need to send Saab up here because Saab's apparently going to be a witness against Maduro, and but not Cabello, because you see, it's still the same regime. It's a socialist communist regime, and nothing's changed fundamentally. So what Trump did, instead of doing a regime change operation, which everybody thought he was going to do, including Maria Corina Machado and all the dissidents who had won this election, Trump decides to leave the regime in power. Now, I'm not advocating a regime change operation. I don't think there should have been any intervention at all. But after they got Maduro, they could have just walked away. Or they could have done a regime change operation. I say that they should have never done it in the first place. But what was surprised everybody was that Trump did not do a regime change operation and put the people who had genuinely won the election, who were generally, quote, free market, who were right-wing, pro-U.S., he dissed them. He dissed Maria Corina Machado. He said, she doesn't have respect of her people. Are you kidding me? She had total respect of her people, at least up until the time where she started, bowing to Trump and seeking his approval and giving him her Nobel Prize. I mean, it's just shameful, obsequious conduct on her part. I mean, she had to have lost a lot of respect because she doesn't realize that the U.S. government is her enemy now, including the Venezuelan regime. It's not just the Venezuelan regime that is the enemy of her freedom and the freedom of the Venezuelan people. It's also the Trump administration and the national security state. That's their freedom too. She can't process that. So when she tries to return to Venezuela, and I've said before that if she does that, they're going to kill her. I mean, this is a ruthless regime. And sure enough, Trump says, no, I don't want you to go down there because it's not safe. Now, what does he mean by that? I'm not sure. But I'll tell you what I think it means. It means that they'll kill her down there. U.S. officials can't protect her from that. But in any event, she decided she was going to try to go, and she was blocked. That her plan was to go to Curacao, I think, and that was blocked. And then she was going to fly from Panama, and that was blocked. And so she doesn't know how she's going to get in. I think her smartest move, if she's going to go back, is to go in surreptitiously and ensconce herself within the dissidents secretly. Because if she goes out and starts leading protests, which she should be free to do, I mean, protest is a fundamental, natural, God-given right. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech. I don't think her life is going to last very long. Because of this socialist communist regime that Trump is partnering with. It is quite incredible. It's just shocking. He's a conservative. He's a right-winger. He's a Republican partnering with a communist regime, which makes it very ironic because now he's declaiming against communism because of the democratic socialists that are winning elections in the Democratic Party. So he's decided he's going to make this as his theme for the midterms to try to stem the losses of the Republicans in the midterms, saying, oh, they want to turn America into communism, as if it's something bad. Well, if it's something bad, which it is, but why then partner with this communist regime? Just leave them alone. Let the Venezuelan people handle it. Walk away from it. That's not what he's done. And so what he's doing in this process is dissing the people that he was targeting, that the U.S. government was targeting with sanctions, death by starvation. Okay? He's dissing them. They won the election overwhelmingly, but he's saying, you stay out. We're not going to have elections, at least not in the near term here. Delsey's a terrific person, he said, and I'm working with her. Because for stability, he wants stability, because he feels that a democratic system, democratic elections mean instability. Well, every totalitarian regime feels that way. Why do you think they don't have elections in North Korea or China and whatever? Because that's instability. And so imagine a U.S. president, the U.S. government is standing against elections and partnering and helping to maintain existence, at least on a semi-permanent basis, a socialist communist regime, a centrally planned regime. So you've got this weird system where the oil revenues are coming into the coffers of the U.S. government, and then Delcy Rodriguez submits a budget, says this is what we need money for. And like on this earthquake relief, we need money for and then Trump signs off on it, approves it, and puts the money in the hands of the government, the Venezuelan government. Okay, that's not the way a free enterprise system works. Now, in the meantime, he wants U.S. companies, oil companies, going down there and invest and put all their money. Why would anybody invest in a socialist communist country? Just because it's being run by the U.S. government? That's ridiculous. I mean, the whole thing is bizarre. It's topsy-turvy. It's not what this country is supposed to be standing for. This country is supposed to be standing for individual liberty, free markets, free enterprise, a capitalist system, a genuine capitalist system. Now, I'm not saying that these dissidents are any pure libertarians or anything, but they orient more toward free markets than the self-avowed Marxists there. There certainly wouldn't be this centrally planned socialist communist system that exists there now. Yeah, there'd be the regulated economy and so forth, but it would be much more liberalized than is now, and there'd be presumably more civil liberties. People wouldn't be arrested in the streets for protesting. It would be more of a liberal society in the classical liberal sense, even though it certainly would not be the ideal libertarian society. And what's amazing is that Trump is standing with the socialist communist regime. So is the CIA. So is the Pentagon. So is the NSA. Even while at the same time having this brutal embargo against the Cuban people that is making the Cuban people starve to death and die of malnutrition and illness because of their so-called communist regime there. How do they reconcile this? How do these people live with themselves with this? And what's shocking too is Americans just go nonchalantly as if this is all just normal. Oh, it's all normal, Jacob. Everything will work out. It's all normal. It's not normal. It's bizarre. It's absolutely amazing. Not only that it's happening, but that American people, including the right wing, except for Mary Anastasia O'Grady of the Wall Street Journal, are just treating it as normal. And this is why the libertarian vision for America really needs to be evaluated by people. It's the only solution to all this. No more foreign interventionism at all. No more sanctions. No more embargoes. No more blockades. No more foreign wars. No more national security state. Cold War is over. That's what was the reason for the conversion to a national security state, with its power of assassination and power of torture. That has Guantanamo Bay, the torture camp there. That has nothing to do with America's heritage. It violates America's heritage. We need to restore a limited government republic. This is where Americans need to do some soul searching, and hopefully this bizarre situation in Venezuela will cause a lot more Americans to do that. I'm Jacob Hornberger. This is Trump Watch. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, thank you for your great support of the Future of Freedom Foundation.